Welcome everybody to a special new series that I'm thrilled to be hosting on LinkedIn called The Entrepreneur's Chair. Through this series, my goal is to provide you with intimate and authentic conversation with trailblazing entrepreneurs that are modifying, changing the landscape of the Austin business scene. From startup founders to seasoned business moguls, we're going to deep dive into conversations about triumphs, challenges, pivotal opportunities that shaped their entrepreneurial journey. Please welcome our guest today, Sarah Goodman. Sarah is co-founder, president of Eminence, M&A Strategies. She has nearly 2 decades of experience in both public and private sectors. Following an accomplished career in a firm working with Fortune 100 brands, she got started in M&A as she launched her own successful acquisition project. So not only is Sarah an accomplished entrepreneur, she also actively involved in professional organizations such as ACG, NextGen, Provisor, WConnect, Women Presidents Organization, demonstrating her commitment to networking and continuous growth. Additionally, she's a dedicated philanthropist, thank you for giving back, in the Austin community, contributing as a Hat Trick Society member with the 4ATX Foundation, the community outreach arm of the Austin FC MLS team. So Sarah, I love your story. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I'm very interested, how did you get started in M&A? Because it sounds like your path was a little bit different, so do you mind sharing?
Yeah, so for many years I was, working in corporate and quite happily was working with some really fantastic brands, had an incredible team and a leadership team that had invested a lot in helping me grow. But I was sort of, I always kind of had this discomfort. As I kind of rose through the ranks in my corporate role, I found myself unsatisfied. And I originally hired a executive coach because my thought was, maybe as I've moved up through the ranks in this organization, maybe I need to grow, right? In order to find satisfaction and happiness, I need to kind of leave behind, what got you here won't get you there.
Sure.
So as I kind of went through that exercise in trying to find satisfaction and kind of happiness in this role that I had worked so hard to achieve, I kind of realized that I'd kind of always been an entrepreneur at heart. I'd been an entrepreneur at the company, developing some kind of unique lines of business and applications. My husband and I had always been real estate investors and kind of building a business that way. And so through the executive coaching process, I kind of decided, I think I'd like to buy a business. I think I want to be a CEO.
Of course.
Right. So I really, with a lot of support from my leadership team at the time, they kind of gave me a little bit of room to flap my wings and figure that out. And I kind of started that journey, and it opened this kind of wide world of founder-led companies and kind of understanding all the ins and outs. My experience with my profession wasn't my now profession.
Yes.
Was really, it was definitely an education. I always try to speak positively. Sure. But I definitely saw not only a space, room for improvement, the way that we, in my practice, the way that we handle a lot of our the human element and the communication styles and the way that we embrace technology, that's something that's really not across the board in the industry. And so I saw a very real opportunity that I thought I could do it, and I did. So it felt like, from the outside looking in, it probably feels like it was a quick transition, maybe stepping off a cliff. But really it was kind of a 2 or 3 year journey of going through the initial, search and acquisition process, and then, really kind of deeply understanding the space and saying, I think I've got a space here where I could really help some people.
That's great. It sounds like you jumped off, you did that activity with the M&A, and there were, it sounds like quite a few lessons learned during that. So did you find that you wanted to do things a little bit different in the next stage with the Eminence M&A?
Absolutely. I would say that, first of all, I think that there's a benefit. I know that there's been a lot of kind of conflicting opinions about, diversity and inclusion, and I'm not going to dig into all of that. But I will say that there is not a lot of diversity in the space. Sure. And I felt like as a woman who had been at the deal table, I was a little underserved or potentially, and maybe it's my own bias talking that I felt like maybe I wasn't taken seriously. But I saw that there was definitely an avenue to lead with education and help other women, to also really create a safe space for the human element of M&A. And I really wanted to kind of bring that to the table because that was certainly not my experience. So I thought, let's give it a go.
It's interesting. We haven't known each other that long, but I feel like I've known you forever. And you're just like a fountain of information, and you're willing to share that information with just everybody in the space, and I find that it's just that giving quality of is so important, and you manifest that. So thank you for the give back that you give every single day to everybody you talk to.
Thank you so much. It's something I'm extremely passionate about. Owners and founders and entrepreneurs knowing what they have and knowing what really builds value. Being an entrepreneur is really rewarding, but it's also really challenging. Yes. And I would hate for someone to go through that challenge and just from a gap in information, not have the tools and information that they really need to create that wealth, to create that value, to create that impact that they're really looking and striving for. So I give that information freely to pretty much anyone that will listen. So
that's very nice to hear, and I've experienced it, so thank you there. So what specific skills and experience from your leadership roles, everything you've done before, public, private, has been instrumental in shaping your M&A experience?
Well, so with any profession, there's hard skills that are required. Okay. Certainly, I spent many years in kind of an operational and leadership capacity, deeply understanding, what makes a business, profitable and successful. Okay. Truly the tactical elements of P&L management, hiring and firing and, managing a team, developing go-to-market strategies. All of those things are relevant in what I do. But what I think is often missing is that kind of human element and really appreciating that for every, to really have a successful M&A transaction, it really is almost a marriage. And you have to really have a lot of those tactical skills to really understand the financial elements, the risks, the contracts, all of that, all of that skills was fired in my for corporate days. But what I think I've brought forward just from, being a leader, building a team, being a mother, being a friend, being a spouse, is a level of empathy that's often missing, especially in the clientele that I serve.
And it's interesting, I'll get a little personal here because I did have a company and I sold it, and it sold it after 10 years, and it was like my baby. It is. And so you deal with so many founders that now they're taking their baby and it's basically giving it to someone else. How do you navigate both of those to keep each party happy in those kind of transactions?
It is truly the hardest part, right? If it was just a tactical asset that we were selling, like a hunk of real estate or, a piece of equipment. But I say the same thing. Often a founder-led business, the business is often their first and sometimes their favorite child. And so we really are having to be really goal-oriented and understand, for that owner, what is the vision? What is the path? What are we hoping to achieve from this activity? If our goals are to simply maximize, the return, the financial aspects of the transaction, then that's great. That's a goal. But if we're really trying to pass the baton to the next generation, many founders will tell me, I don't care who buys it as long as the check clears. And they almost never mean that. That's almost never the truth. So it is kind of this peeling back the layers to kind of understand what is your vision for this child that you've reared? What is the next chapter? What would be an ideal outcome for you? And then we work backwards from there.
I've also heard that there can be a lot of regret, that some people sell their company and then afterwards they're like, why did I do this? It sounds like when you're working with someone, the journey starts quite early with helping them to process what is it they really want. Is that a key part of what you do?
It's such a huge part, because it is ultimately so much of what makes early stage or young companies, or even companies that have been around for 20 or 30 years, when they're really founder-led, a lot of the success is really born from the passion of that founder. And so now we've had a history of a company that's had maybe 10, maybe 30, maybe multiple generations of passion that have been infused in that business. And now we're saying, okay, now we have to extract that from your identity. And so many people draw so much from being, I'm the CEO, I am the president of Eminence M&A Strategies. They don't even know how to introduce themselves anymore. They don't know they've had these employees, many of them by their side for 5, 10, 15 years. They've become family. So in a lot of ways, it is really an exciting chapter, and it's a magical time to think about a successful exit of a business, which, congratulations again. It's so rare that it happens. I'm working to change that, but it is ultimately also, it can be a period of grief, and mourning, the sunset of one identity and the rise of another. And so we do a lot of work to kind of start recognizing those emotions, start appreciating what change is going to happen, especially for a founder that's going to continue on with the business for maybe a year or 3 years or 5 years. They've never been anybody else's employee before. And it's also really, I think much like when your children grow and they need you a little bit less, that's kind of some of the emotions that we have to kind of unpack and prepare the people we work with to experience.
I love that. It's more of a holistic approach and not transactional, and that just means a lot. When you go in and work with, let's say, a founder, because we're speaking mostly to the entrepreneur community, when you look at a company and you have that initial conversation, what are some of the things that you look and say, hey, we may not be ready for a transaction yet. Maybe we should work on some of these things. Are there some patterns you see?
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the biggest issues that we have, and we'll kind of speak to that more tactical element, is truly what we call the valuation gap.
Okay.
And it's why I'm so passionate about education is, if you did have a piece of real estate, or some other tangible asset, owners typically, like if you own a home, you have an idea of what that home is worth. Maybe it's not a perfect number, but you're pretty close. Okay. Business owners often really don't have an idea of what their business is worth. And so people will kind of truck along, and maybe they have an opinion that they hear maybe what they want to hear from their CPA, and they have an expectation that, my business is worth, 10x revenue. There are businesses that are potentially worth 10x revenue. Most of them are not. Mm-hmm. So that's an area that we often, someone will come to me and say, hey, we're thinking about, the next chapter, we're thinking about retirement, we're thinking about, kind of changing direction and exiting the business, and the valuation is not where it needs to be. So I always advocate, I don't necessarily feel like these need to be super expensive valuations. We do them complimentary. But, get an opinion of value from someone that works in the space annually or biannually, and really get a temperature, if you can, maybe 3 years out from an exit.
So we're talking long. We want to start this early on so we're prepared emotionally. We have the data we need.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So understanding what the value drivers are in your business, that's a big area that we spend a lot of time. The next one is the hard one, and kind of what we've been talking about. If you want to sell and exit your business, but every single decision runs through you.
Oh, yeah.
If you're the key man in the business and you're going to leave, the key man, the key woman, the key person, and you're going to exit, there has to be some redundancy. There has to be some knowledge sharing. That's another kind of big area we see that it is often, we're not quite ready. We've got to solve how you are the critical infrastructure to the business. We have to work on that before we could really achieve the exit that you want.
Yeah, I find working with companies that face that, it truly is building a true leadership team instead of a person that runs a business. So, and that's not an easy transition for many CEOs to make.
It is certainly not, and it's hard too. Like I said, so much about what makes many, especially in the small and medium business space where we work, so much about what makes those businesses great is the culture that's infused from the founder, and so it's a careful line for sure.
I love that. So, what have been some of the most memorable wins and challenges in your current line of work?
So I would say, let's start with the hard stuff first,
Sure.
I think, right? One of my transactions that I'd worked on for many, many months, we were planning to close March of 2023, which was about 2 weeks after there was quite the kerfuffle with the Silicon Valley Bank and,
yes.
Were the banks going to collapse? Were they not?
Right.
And then First Citizens and so it was a very uncertain time. And
Right.
so a transaction that we'd been working on for probably the better part of 18 months fell apart. So what I think is important, the lesson for me from that was, one, never count your chickens before they hatch. For me, a lot of our revenue and liquidity in
Right.
our business is really driven from successful transactions. And so when you have to start over, when you're right there at the finish line, you really learn about resiliency. I had to learn a hard lesson about resiliency in my own business, Elizabeth. And then I would say that was really challenging. And then also, having to kind of put my brave face on to that seller and kind of say, we're going to have to start over. And so that was a really tough, period for all of us, but we certainly persevered and were able to, identify other buyers and proceed forward. But it was a very challenging and defeating kind of period, and certainly you start to have those thoughts of like, am I doing this? Should I be doing this? Could I have done something differently? So that was a hard one because it felt like it fell apart and it wasn't anyone's fault. It was just completely outside of our control.
I've always heard, though, with M&A that you have to be really careful because you can get focused on the exit and forget about running your business. And then there's economic, you have no control over who's acquiring your company. They can decide not to go forward. And so how do you keep your entrepreneurs, their eye on the ball while you're going through an M&A?
I use an old lesson from when I was in track and field. run through the finish line, right?
That is beautiful. Can I steal that from you?
Please, you can.
Run through the finish line.
Run through the finish line. The end of the race is about 100 yards past. Run hard all the way through. I try to make it more fun, like, listen, I will tell you when to start blending margaritas and to buy the plane tickets, but until then, your job is to keep your foot on the gas pedal.
Okay.
But it's a hard one when you're that close and it falls apart, and it does happen.
I hear frequent stories about that. Well, let's get back to the memorable wins.
The wins, those are the best. So a transaction that I had the privilege of working on last year was for two owners that I've known far longer than I've been in M&A. So I knew them very well. I'd known many of the employees, and I was a little reticent to actually take on the project because of the kind of existing personal relationships. M&A is challenging, and sometimes I'm very pleasant, but sometimes in negotiation, and you've got to be a bulldog to kind of get things done. And so I was kind of worried that my transaction personality might negatively impact my personal relationship. But it was so rewarding to be able to advocate for them and to see them through a successful transaction, and to personally know the people that, for the employment agreements and some of the downstream incentives, these are individuals I've known for the better part of maybe 15 or 20 years. And so getting to be the facilitator, the orchestrator, the protector for those parties to see through to the next chapter was really fulfilling. And it was a very well done transaction executed on both sides. It got a little iffy there at the end.
Sure.
In M&A, we have a saying, if the deal doesn't die at least 5 times, it's not real M&A. So that certainly happened. The deal almost died a couple times, but ultimately we were able to get it done. And it was it's always really rewarding to see that success for the owner, right. But to really have such a deep personal connection with so many people at the company, that was really, really special for me.
That's got to be exciting, because a successful M&A, especially with a founder that's built something, you basically change their life. And that's a wonderful profession to be in.
All the hard work, all the tough calls, all the, what can kind of sometimes feel like a little bit of a dogfight with the attorneys, it's all worth it. It kind of cheers the post-transaction after everyone's gotten some rest and we're past that kind of initial phase. We have a celebration dinner, and those are my absolute favorite. It's really fun.
That's beautiful. So I'd like to end each episode with 2 questions. And the first one is, what authentically makes a successful entrepreneur?
I really thought a lot about this because it took me so long to kind of really embrace that I was an entrepreneur. It was really hard for me to introduce myself or to say I'm an entrepreneur. So my thought of what makes a successful entrepreneur is someone that has the integrity and the authenticity and the boldness to embrace that title and to try. There are so many people who never try. They have a great idea and they keep it to themselves. They let the fear of failure or judgment prevent them from trying. So while my job is to help people achieve a successful, big liquidity event, an entrepreneur is someone that has the boldness, the audacity to give it a go.
That's very well said. Thank you. And last but not least, how do you define success as an entrepreneur?
Success as an entrepreneur, I think those are probably pretty tied in together. But I would say, I'll double down on my comment to you are an entrepreneur if you try. Success as an entrepreneur for me is someone that is willing to fail, is willing to have things go bad, have a transaction die at the line, and kind of keep going, right? Entrepreneurship is ultimately an exercise in repeat iteration, trial and error, and being really stubborn and dogged about what you want to achieve.
Very well said. Sarah, thank you so much
Thank
for spending
you.
time with me and sharing what you do, and I appreciate you being part of the Entrepreneur Chair today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to watch all of the episodes. This is going to be great.
Me too.